Are you a nice guy who's been diagnosed with ADHD? That's a attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Or do you suspect you have ADHD? Why does it seem like every man with nice guy syndrome has ADHD too? In this episode, we're going to break down just what is happening here and what are the differences between ADHD and nice guy syndrome. Welcome to the Nice Guy Show. I'm your host, Ari Graff, and I'm joined by my co-hosts, Faisal Khokhar and Chuck Chapman. The three of us are coaches dedicated to helping nice guys because we're recovering nice guys ourselves. Together, we have decades of experience helping men level up. Our mission is to help men develop the confidence and the skills to get the love, sex, and success they desire. So I have a lot of nice guy clients, and I think at least half of them have an ADHD diagnosis. So it might be a little skewed in my world, but it feels a lot of the time like everybody's got an ADHD diagnosis or thinks they might, or they feel like they have attention problems. So ADHD, um, what is it? It's a neurological disorder that it's a developmental disorder. So it starts appearing in childhood. You can have it as an adult, but in order for the diagnosis, you really should have signs of it in childhood. And it's characterized by symptoms like inattention, forgetfulness, distractibility, um, hyperactivity, impulsivity. You see a lot of the hyperactiveness in the children. As people get older, the hyperactivity tends to diminish. You don't see adults bouncing around the room usually. Maybe they might be on drugs, um, but usually those kids, and we've all seen those kids who are really literally bouncing off the walls or falling out of their chair or blurting things out. Those things do change over time, even left untreated. So, ADHD is a big part of my clinical background as a psychologist. I used to evaluate mostly kids, but also adults for ADHD and other types of learning problems. So I've seen a lot of people with it. And as I've gone into working with men and specializing in nice guys, it just seems like every man has an ADHD diagnosis nowadays. Is that what you guys are seeing in the men that you work with? Um, and why do you think so many men uh, are getting that diagnosis, Chuck?
Well, I think there is definitely a correlation between the nice guy syndrome and ADHD, and part of the reason is, I have ADHD myself, and I think there's the core belief of the nice guy is I'm unlovable and unacceptable just as I am, and this core belief started in childhood, and when you have ADHD, oftentimes what happens is you see yourself as being different from other people. You see other people, other kids being able to study, other kids being able to pay attention, and you start to wonder what's wrong with me, and you start to create sort of adaptive ways at fitting in. And I think that sort of translates really well to the nice guy syndrome because we already have this feeling that I'm unlovable and acceptable, or that there's something different about me. So when you have ADHD, and especially when you're undiagnosed with it, all you know is that I'm just not like everybody else. And the unlovable, unacceptable part fits in really well with that because when you have ADHD and you're either not paying attention or you're being distracted or you're impulsive or something along those lines, and you're constantly getting corrected, scolded, told, not to do that, that you begin to develop that internalized belief that I'm unlovable, unacceptable just the way that I am. And so I think that there's a tremendous amount of nice guys because of this. There's a correlation, learning disabilities. Now, I have, not only ADHD, but I have uh, dyscalculia and what's the other one? Words on
Dyslexia, dysgraphia.
dyslexia. Yeah, dysgraphia. Yeah, that. anything with sequences, I have a really difficult time with. So like remembering numbers, remembering dates, remembering phone numbers, math, any of those kind of things. And so when I was going to school, I always felt like I was kind of on the outside. And, I'm old enough that it wasn't really diagnosed back then. And it wasn't until a couple of years ago where I actually got the diagnosis of ADHD. And part of that was I was working with so many guys that had ADHD, and I'm like, I'm just like them. I'm having, as I was working with nice guys. And so what did it for me was I was going through some old boxes and I came across report cards from my grade school days, and, basically first through sixth grade. And every single one of them said, Chuck's really smart, but he can't pay attention. He isn't able to focus. He's always in his head. He's daydreaming. And it was like, oh my gosh, like the light bulb went off, And so I went through the process of getting diagnosed and got on some ADHD meds, and it's been a game changer for me.
I didn't know that about you, Chuck.
Yeah, I'm a man of many, many mysteries.
Pay attention, Ari. Pay attention.
Right? Yeah.
But I think you're bringing up a great point about that internal experience of having ADHD, and maybe especially when it's undiagnosed, leads to that feeling of differentness, that feeling of defectiveness, and maybe toxic shame. That sense that I'm bad. There's something wrong with me.
Mm-hmm.
So are you saying that ADHD for at least some people can be one of the roots of their nice guy syndrome?
Yeah. I was working with a guy not that long ago, and as I was working with him, I'm like, this guy's on the spectrum. He's high functioning. You can just, and so I kind of brought it up with him, and he's like, I've been wondering the same thing. And he went and got a diagnosis, and he was on this, not only on the spectrum, but had ADHD, because they're kind of comorbidity
Comorbid.
there. That it was like such a freedom thing for him. He was like, oh, this totally makes sense why I've been struggling my whole life. That, oh, it's not like there's something like morally flawed within me. It's just my brain works different than other people. And he just started to thrive after that diagnosis. So I think even getting the diagnosis can be really, really helpful for guys.
Which is another similarity with nice guy syndrome. It's like
Right.
once you read No More
Right.
Mr. Nice Guy, you identify those nice guy behaviors in yourself.
Not alone.
Yeah. And
I suppose
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I suppose it gives you that certainty, doesn't it? It's like, okay, this is where I'm now, and I know where what I'm working with.
Yeah.
It's like when you mention all the ADHD, I'm like, yeah, that's me. Yeah, that's my son. That's my son. And I've seen all the a lot of the ADHD symptoms. I'm like, okay, I'm definitely on that spectrum. And even my exes have diagnosed me with other spectrums as well, as like some of them like to do. And I'm like, I've got every single spectrum somewhere somehow. It's like, is there any human being who doesn't have that spectrum? So I think we can sometimes go over obsessive with that spectrum. Here's something interesting, and I've been thinking about the ADHD spectrum and some of the symptoms, like not being able to focus, being impulsive, hyperactive. Have you ever noticed that a lot of these symptoms on a different layer of the masculine and feminine, all of these correlate with the feminine energy? Yeah, if you think about it, so for example, being impulsive, not single focus, whereas the masculine is more like focused, single focus, whereas the feminine is more diffused awareness. And most nice guys, the nice guy syndrome is, you will notice that they have high feminine energy. So I just wanted to put that out there. And that was just, an observation that I had, that a lot of guys with ADHD are pretty high on the feminine spectrum.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so. I think that the part of the difference, though, is like people with ADHD actually can focus. They hyper focus. It's just when something isn't interesting to them. Like if something's interesting me, I'm in the zone. I'm in the flow. I'm hyper focused. In fact, when I was going through my diagnosis, I was talking to my ex-wife. We were married 20 years, and I said, "Yeah, I'm, was diagnosed with ADHD," and she's like, "You can't be ADHD because you focus so well. Like you're just always focused on something." I'm like, "That's one of the symptoms is hyper focused behavior." But to your point, Faisal, I think that there is that correlation of the masculine feminine energy, and I think the idea of is not to be one or the other, but to create that balance of energy within yourself. And so if you
Yeah.
have, like, the nice guys have a lot of feminine energy, probably could be a correlation. The idea is then to develop the masculine side so that you create balance within yourself.
Yeah. Here's another question, because I mean, this is such an interesting topic. Have you ever guys noticed that the more, say, for example, you have really bad sleep? I know, to me, one of the most important pillars when I'm teaching is sleep, because I've noticed that when you have poor sleep, it's like a big domino that affects everything else. Have you ever noticed that when someone has really poor sleep, they're really emotional? They binge on social media, they're distracted, they cannot focus. Have you noticed that sleep makes the ADHD symptoms worse?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, poor sleep, whether it's poor quantity or poor quality, is going to contribute to cognitive symptoms like inattention, memory difficulties, and those kind of emotional self-regulation problems you're talking about, like more emotional highs and lows. Yeah, more things like more impulsivity, binge eating. So yeah, poor sleep leads to a lot of problems.
Yeah,
Um,
overreactiveness, stuff like that.
but one
And
of the
it's
points, or
I was,
go
I
ahead,
was just
Chuck, and then I'll
I was
make
just
my
gonna say it's a
point.
little bit chicken and egg kind of thing too. If you have ADHD, your mind is always going, and so it's really difficult to shut off. So it's difficult to go to sleep. And one of the things that helps people with ADHD, is actually stimulation, calms you down. So you're playing video games, at 1 o'clock in the morning because your brain is going and it actually feels relaxing to you. Whereas if you go to bed, then your brain starts spinning and you can't sleep. And so I think it's a little bit of a chicken and egg thing with ADHD of it's difficult to sleep, which then makes the symptoms worse too.
What do people in the tribe do? I mean, like in the caveman days, or when they had, was ADHD such a big problem, or was it
Yeah.
because we're so sitting down, not doing anything, and then we have all of these mobile phones, which I know which are designed to be hyper stimulant, start and stop the stimulation. So, is that a really, I would say, temporary way of trying to soothe yourself through stimulation, like computer games, mobile phones?
Well, think of it this way. So about 10% of the population has ADHD, which makes sense. So when we were in tribes of about 30 people, then you'd have one or two people who were hypersensitive to distractions. Those were the people that were aware of the grass rustling and a lion being there. So you would actually need people with ADHD to have those sensitivities to be able to protect the tribe. So it's actually, very much what the cavemen did, is 10% of their tribe, maybe two people, had those symptoms, and they were the ones that were probably the shamans, probably the healers as well.
And the
That's
lookout
right. I mean,
guys.
so there may be some evolutionary reasons or value for ADHD. I think is it's a good point. One of the things you were bringing up before, Faisal, is about like poor sleep causing attention symptoms. Um, yeah, poor sleep is just one of many things that can cause attention problems. So I think this is part of the complexity of diagnosing ADHD correctly. And my involvement working with people with ADHD was as an evaluator mainly. So I have a lot of experience with this. So I believe that a lot of people are labeling their attention problems as due to ADHD when it could be other factors, or they could have ADHD plus other things. Like for example, I didn't grow up with ADHD. my brother did. So I have a lot of experience knowing what it looks like in a kid. But I have a history of sleep apnea, which didn't get diagnosed until I was an adult. But I would like fall asleep in grad school classes. People thought that I was just this sleepy guy. Maybe people still do. I don't know. But it took. I was working with another psychologist, and we would do sessions together. And she noticed me dozing off for a few seconds in session, which is embarrassing. But also, she had the clinical acumen to suggest, maybe you have a sleep disorder. So I went and got a sleep study, and it turned out I did have sleep apnea. And mind you, I was 29. Um, I was running marathons. I had a little pot belly, but I wasn't like the picture of sleep apnea that we think of. But it turned out I did have sleep apnea, and half my family has sleep apnea. So that's really, I think, the source of my attention problem. So then I went on a CPAP machine. It's a breathing machine for years. So I had that whole journey, but that was the source of my attention problem. So there's different types of attention problems. There's different types of ADHD. So the ADHD landscape is complex, and I think there's a real tendency to generalize about it.
Did you ever fall asleep on a date or anything? Just sitting there going,
Probably. I fell asleep at a Parliament Funkadelic concert.
I fell asleep during sex once.
no.
And
You can't remember.
I'm still mad at you about that, Chuck. Yeah. I've fallen asleep standing up. Let's continue.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things that's important to kind of understand too is ADHD is really about this. I mean, it's a lot of different things, but one of the primary things, it's a dopamine issue. That people with ADHD have difficulty accessing dopamine. And so when they find something that accesses the dopamine, they get really into that. And with social media and scrolling and all of those kind of things, it's intermittent reward system of the dopamine. So I think that, to your point, Faisal, that social media, how quickly things are happening, how quickly, you can get a dopamine hit, that's actually creating kind of a pseudo ADHD within people, because ADHD is a lot about the dopamine reward and inability to access it. So if you're getting a large dopamine hits, then you're not able to access dopamine. You're going to go back to the thing that creates the dopamine hit.
Yeah, that's what I noticed with individuals using social media a lot, because social media and games or even porn, they're getting that constant hit again. And then what I see is the symptoms that correlate with a lot with ADHD, like it just seems to make it a lot worse. It makes a lot of acute symptoms they get off the ADHD because they've got social media, and the way social media apps are designed are to exploit you, because we didn't have I remember studying about this years ago when I was doing computer science in this, and when they were designing apps, neurologists would design apps to say, how can we make this habit forming, how can we make people addicted to apps.
That's right. And the heads of the social media companies, they don't allow their kids to use their apps because they know that they can be damaging. Watch what Mark Zuckerberg's kids are using. They're probably using
MySpace or something really old one.
Right. But to the point, I think that we're probably going to be seeing an increase of ADHD because kids are having, as their brains are developing, they're regulating to a dopamine stream of reward and, intermittent reward. And as a result of that, I think that, I think we're seeing that like in the generation, sort of behind us, that they struggle with ADHD, but I think that the kids in schools today struggle with things like autism and ADHD even more. I mean, my wife is
Yes.
a speech therapist, and she has said, the behavior of the kids, she's been doing this for 20 years, the behavior of the kids has just changed over the years, that there's just so much more hyperactivity, there's so much more disrespect, there's so much more impulsiveness in the kids. And I think a lot of that is because they're all on social media and they're getting, their brains are developing around these dopamine hits. And I don't think our brains are, we have a 10,000-year-old operating system. We haven't caught up to current technology. And I think we're seeing an effect of that kind of long term. We'll see what happens in the future, but
Yeah, it's an interesting question, which brings up a couple of points I wanted to make. Was we don't fully understand why there's more people being diagnosed with things like ADHD and autism spectrum. Is there something environmental going on? I think one of the reasons people are being diagnosed more is greater awareness, just in the broader culture, and among healthcare professionals, and we're more able to detect the more subtle attention problems. Now, are we calling more subtle attention problems ADHD now? I think we are sometimes. That was something that happened when I was doing evaluations. Um, you know, you've got a kid who didn't show any ADHD symptoms, in elementary school, but in high school, they're having trouble finishing tests on time. And they say, that they can't hold the information in their head that they're reading on the test. So, do they have ADHD, or are they still in the range of normal? So I think as an evaluator, I felt like the the definition, or how we're diagnosing ADHD, could slip over time. So I believe that's happening. I saw it in myself. It was one of the reasons that it was one reason that I was less enthusiastic over time about doing diagnostic evaluations. Another thing that Faisal was bringing up, when we were talking about social media and the impact on our attention, I think it does impact our attention. Um, you know, People are unable to feel bored now. Like we can't wait in the checkout line at the grocery store for 3 minutes
No.
without looking on our phones, like, immediately. We're intolerant of being bored. But if you being able to tolerate boredom is actually part of our attention system. And when we meditate, we're strengthening that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
one of the points is, even if you have a neurologically based ADHD, you could still strengthen your attention through your practices, through your habits, or you can weaken it. So
Yes.
things like being on social media or video games all the time, can weaken your attention. Doing things like meditation, other kinds of brain training, doing a martial art, doing yoga, these can strengthen your attention. So there's a lot of things you can do to improve your attention,
Yeah.
that don't involve medication. Medication is warranted for some people, but it's not the only thing. Um, so
One of the things I started, you were talking about habits will either, make the ADHD acute or not. Is with my son, when I saw a lot of the stuff in him and myself, is I got lion's mane. It's a lion's mane mushroom that I found that really helped him, because he used to get some bad reports from school, and he used to say, he's too disruptive, and he can't sit still. And then I put him on lion's mane because I got a friend who works with ADHD as well, and I noticed that he was a lot more calmer, and he says I can focus more, calm more. And then there are times where I have very limited phone use in my house. So I take, sometimes if it's really bad, I'll take away his phone. I'll say, look, we'll have no phone period as well. And a third thing is go out in nature without technology. That's the best thing. I spent the weekend with the kids, and we were out in nature, no phones, and they were so alive. And then he came back with a much calmer nervous system.
Mm-hmm.
Anything you want to add before we wrap up, Chuck?
I guess I would just wrap up like the importance. I mean, if you think you have ADHD, to go and get an evaluation, I think it's a really important part of it, because for me and for some of my clients, it was a shift out of the shame. This wasn't something that like I was doing wrong necessarily, but this was just my brain operates a little bit different. And I think that's something that nice guys tend to deal with too. And again, correlated to the ADHD and the fundamental belief that I'm unlovable and unacceptable just the way that I am, that we deal with shame. And I think it's just a very freeing part of your own recovery to kind of come away with some knowledge about these kind of things. So my encouragement would go get an evaluation if you feel like it might be something you're struggling with.
Yeah, agreed. Get a good evaluation and evaluate all aspects of your health, because many aspects of your health can impact your attention and your performance, your productivity. So ADHD is common, but it's often complex. If you have questions about ADHD, you can get in touch with us. Questions about nice guy syndrome, definitely send us your questions, because we may address them on a future episode. Thanks again for being part of the Nice Guy Show. Please, if you're watching this on YouTube, remember to like and subscribe, as this helps us to reach out to more men who need support. If you're listening to us on your favorite podcast platform, make sure to subscribe there as well. Go to niceguyshow.com, get on the mailing list. If you like this podcast episode, check out episode number 43, Breaking Free, How Nice Guys Can Overcome the Lazy Stigma. Thanks, everybody.
You've been listening to The Nice Guy Show with certified Nice Guy recovery coaches Ari Graff, Chuck Chapman, and Faisal Khokhar. Be sure to subscribe to this channel so you can listen to our latest episodes, and visit us on www.theniceguyShow.com. If you have any topics you'd like to hear us discuss, send us an email at support@theniceguyShow.com. Thanks for listening.